we're about to be thrilled and amazed by an emerging technology. It's the technology of nanoparticles, tiny particles that will dazzle you with their huge potential. But could their introduction turn into another circus, like the debate on GM food? A brilliant future could await us all with the wonders of nanoparticles, if we hold our nerve, maintain our sense of balance, and manage the potential risks.
If it is the mission of man to minimise human suffering, then this is a rabbit hole we have to look down. This is a door we have to open.
We don't know the full consequences. We're just beginning to scratch the surface.
A nanoparticle is smaller than we can imagine. Up to 1/100 millionth of a metre. 10,000 of them would fit across a human hair. Like most sunscreens, this one contains zinc oxide. It's what makes sunscreens white. But in this case, the zinc oxide is in the form of nanoparticles. Now, they're so small, they're actually smaller than the wavelength of visible light. So, when you rub them in, it goes completely clear. This tube of sunscreen contains more nanoparticles of zinc oxide than there are grains of sand on a 1.5 kilometre beach. Nanoparticles are the building blocks of nanotechnology. They can be grown like crystals, virtually atom by atom. They might be tiny, but in the next decade, nanoparticles are going to be big. They're here now, and they'll change our lives forever. The first wave of nanotech is already coming into our daily lives. Well, how about self-cleaning windows? It's not the future, they're here with us right now. This is nanotech glass. You can't see it, but the surface is covered in nanoparticles of titanium dioxide. They form interlocking plates so that when water hits it, it sheets off instead of forming droplets. This is the Nano House, a joint venture run by the CSIRO and UTS in Sydney. A showcase of some of the nanotechnology available today. And it's not just windows. There's nano paints that don't get hot in the sun and nano paints that don't get glary. Nano is everywhere. Tiny particles are not new. We've been living with them for millions of years. Nanoparticles are present in smoke, but urban air pollution generates toxic nanoparticles, and they can cause heart disease, asthma, and cancer. What makes nanoparticles potentially toxic is they are, in a sense, smaller than our biology. Macroparticles don't get into our cells. Nanoparticles can. Once they're in, they can bounce around anywhere, potentially lodging in any organ of the body. But if we can safely harness that ability, then nanoparticles will be the biggest medical advance we've made in decades. In the global race to develop nanotech, Australia is not being left behind. Matt Trow is certain that within a few years his nano-based diagnosis equipment will be able to detect a cancer when it's only a few cells old.
What we like to do is we like to put on the surface of this particle little strands of DNA. Okay? Your DNA would stick only to the particles that have the exact complementary sequence.
So you've made up your nanoparticle with your bit of DNA stuck on it, and you know that that particular piece of DNA, if it matches my DNA, then, for instance, that might mean I've got cancer.
Exactly.
In a few years, machines based on this prototype could warn us about potential diseases locked into our genetic makeup. Treatments, which could include personalised nanoparticle drugs, could target those diseases before we're even clinically aware of them. But nanomedicine is here already. The first of these targeting nanoparticle drugs has been approved for use by the US FDA. And in Australia, nano-based diagnostic kits are already in trials. But some researchers say we're releasing nanoparticles before they've been properly assessed.
People are beginning to understand how particles, when they deposit in the lungs, can translocate across the cell membranes into the blood system, into the lymph system, distribute around the body. But the long-term consequences will take a long time to understand.
In Australia, health authorities we contacted, if they knew about nanoparticles at all, had no real idea about how to deal with this new technology.
I think it's fair to say there's no specific regulations that exist. I think it is timely for Australia to review all its regulatory frameworks to see where they are in the light of the advancements in this science.
The handbrake on nanotech and particularly nanoparticle technology might come from these guys, the suits. Last year, one of the world's biggest reinsurers, Swiss Re, circulated a report that was critical of the pace of the new technology. They warned insurers that governments were not across the health and environmental risks that nano threatens.
That's one that I have to be honest with you, I just don't understand. I would think if I was an insurance company, I would embrace this sort of technology, because let's just think about the billions of dollars that are currently spent on palliative care of people who have cancer.
But it's not just insurers who are unhappy.
Bodies like the Royal Society and the OECD and others have said that in relation to nanoparticles, we do not know enough at the moment, and we need to know more.
We're already groggy after battles with GM, BSE, DDT and PCBs, all disasters that overwhelmed us because science and technology ran ahead of regulation and reasonable debate. Will the launch of nanoparticles be any different?
We've been talking about some very, very powerful emerging technologies, and I think it would be a tragedy if those were held back through ignorant decisions rather than informed decisions.
It would indeed be tragic if we couldn't handle the introduction of nanotechnology properly. As we take the leap, let's hope we have time to reasonably weigh the risks against the enormous benefits that nanotechnology could bring to our lives.